On a freezing winter night in 1996, Jihyun Park arrived at the border between North Korea and China. After decades of starvation, poor living conditions, and fear for her life, Jihyun was fleeing the North Korean regime. At the border, she hid from soldiers as she waited for her little brother to arrive. Her brother had been a soldier in the North Korean army and defected to escape with her. As a consequence, the army raided her house and her village in search of him. Jihyun thought he might have been caught. Fortunately, he showed up, and they began their journey across the border together. Suddenly, they heard shouts from behind. They'd been discovered. North Korean soldiers started shooting at them. Jihyun was paralyzed by the cold and by fear, but she managed to continue running, and they crossed the frozen river that separates the two countries. They arrived in a small village where locals warned them not to stick around. The Chinese authorities had heard the gunshots and might come searching for the fugitives to send them back to their country. One of the villagers offered to call someone who could help. An hour later, a man arrived to pick them up. He seemed friendly at first, but this man had horrible intentions. He was a human trafficker. After escaping the country where she had endured constant violence and oppression, where she had seen her family members starve to death, Jihyun couldn't have imagined that her fate would take an even darker turn on the other side of the border. The darkest chapter of her life was about to begin, marked by human trafficking, slavery, and ultimately ending up in a North Korean prison where she was tortured and left to die. But miraculously, she survived. How did she manage to do it? We'll dive into every detail throughout this video. One of the few advantages Jihyun had was that despite the dictatorial and oppressive regime she lived in, authorities had very few ways to track her down while she was escaping. Unfortunately, even when you think you have full control over your life and fate, you don't. Some of your most sensitive information is being handled by criminals who would do anything to profit from you. Yeah, I'm talking about your data. From 2021 to 2022, the number of data breach victims rose by more than 40%. And we're not talking about email passwords. Cybercriminals are stealing social security numbers, addresses, bank account info, and more. And you can't do anything about it. Until now. Thanks to Incogni, you can know whenever your data is included in brokers' databases where it can be acquired by hackers and other criminals. More importantly, they'll fight back on your behalf. They'll track the brokers and use applicable privacy laws against them until they clear your personal information from their databases. The fight for privacy and data protection is a never-ending battle. Fortunately for you, today you can have 1 year of protection against data brokers at a 60% discount just by using our code HOWTOSURVIVE. Go to incogni.com/howtosurvive and take your data back from the thieves. Now, let's get back to Jihyun's story. North Korea is infamous for its hostility toward its enemies, but also toward its own citizens, particularly those who have been imprisoned for defying the dictatorship. The country's brutal practices have been documented by the organization Korea Future. In 2023, they released a report that exposed the prevalence of starvation, sexual assaults, beatings, and extrajudicial executions within these hellish prisons. More detail about these prisons a little later, but for now, let's explore some of the most terrifying, cruel, and outrageous treatments that detainees have endured, and more importantly, how Jihyun survived and escaped these inhumane conditions. By the time the human trafficker picked up Jihyun and her brother, he had already sold her to a Chinese man who she was forced to marry. If she didn't, she risked getting reported to the police and being sent back to North Korea. But when they arrived at her new home, the man refused to take in her brother. They had no other option but to be separated. After a few weeks at the home, it became clear that Jihyun wasn't a wife, she had been enslaved. Jihyun was forced to work and pay for her food, shelter, and give back money to the family that had paid the human trafficker. Most people might choose to give up in this situation, but Jihyun wanted to keep fighting. She had to keep fighting. That's because she wasn't just doing this for herself. Jihyun was pregnant. Fast forward to 2001 and Jihyun now has a baby boy. Then another terrible thing happened. The Chinese government implemented a new campaign to reward citizens who reported North Korean defectors. The villagers reported Jihyun. She was arrested and sent back to North Korea, leaving her baby son behind.
My child didn't understand what happened. He asked me that, "Mommy, why did you abandon me? Why you leave me?"
Upon returning to her native country, she was sent to a prison camp where she was forced to work barefoot on rocks, walking on animal feces. She was living in inhumane conditions. Soon, Jihyun got sick. The prison guards denied her treatment, even when she couldn't feel the lower part of her body. Unfortunately, this seems to be common practice at these camps. According to the 2023 Korea Future Report, there are more than 200 detention facilities like this throughout North Korea. These facilities were mapped based on victim accounts and satellite images. Former inmates reported starvation, brutal beatings, and receiving no medical treatment. Women revealed that they were sexually assaulted by the guards and forced to have abortions. The conditions caused the deaths of many detainees. Many others were executed without a trial. Korea Future hopes their report will provide evidence of international law violations that will lead to the prosecution of the perpetrators. Okay, now back to Jihyun. Unable to work due to a deadly infection that had spread throughout her lower body, she was left to die outside the camp. But once again, Jihyun refused to give up. She managed to get to a police station and ask for help. They sent her to an orphanage where she received treatment for her wounds, but she was under police surveillance and knew she would be sent back to the prison camp as soon as she healed. But this time, Jihyun had a strategy. She now knew that in North Korea there are a lot of brokers who, along with human traffickers, sell North Korean women and girls to Chinese men. So Jihyun purposely got herself trafficked in hopes of reuniting with her son. While she was crossing the border with the broker and other trafficked people, their appearance raised questions from a taxi driver. He could report them to police and be rewarded. Jihyun was the only one who could speak Chinese. She handled the situation and saved everyone's lives. The broker was thankful that she had saved his life. He decided not to sell her and allowed her to contact her son. For the first time in years, Jihyun was free. She found her son and took him away from the village. She was trying to reach a South Korean embassy to ask for asylum when she met another North Korean escapee. They fell in love almost immediately. Eventually, the new couple and her son managed to contact the United Nations and were guaranteed refuge in the United Kingdom. They're now living there with their children. After escaping a North Korean prison camp, getting human trafficked, and sold into slavery, Jihyun is speaking out about the terrible conditions she faced. She's written a book and several documentaries have been made about her incredible survival story. Hopefully, her testimony, along with hundreds of other survivors and the evidence collected by organizations like Korea Future, will shine a light on the abuses of this repressive regime and bring the perpetrators to justice.
North Koreans deserve the right to live freely without the fear of torture and persecutions. You can make that possible by sharing our story.
Unfortunately, North Korea isn't the only country where inmates, especially women, are subjected to horrific conditions. Dozens of female prisoners have died in these facilities. Do you want to know their stories? Well, keep watching How to Survive.